everyone! So in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to make a Breyer blanket. I've gotten a couple of requests lately to make a Breyer blanket, and with the cold weather approaching it seems like the best time, so here's the tutorial. So in order to make a blanket you don't need too much. You need some fabric that you want to make your blanket out of, which is pretty obvious, but other than that you need something to sew your blanket with. I use a sewing machine, but you could do the whole thing with a needle and thread, and if you really wanted to you could try gluing it. It might work out. I've never tried, but you could. You're also going to need some paper because you need to make a pattern for this, as well as some ribbon to use as the closure and something to buckle it up. I like to use either hook and eyes, that's what I'm using here, but you could also use lobster clasps or little buckles. And finally you will need some Velcro for the front closure. I would also like to note that by using some form of mesh fabric you can use this exact same tutorial to make a fly sheet instead. So to begin you have to make a pattern, and to do that you need a long piece of paper. Mine is about 18 inches long, but you can also tape together some smaller pieces of paper if you don't have one that's long enough. Then you have to fold it in half lengthwise like this. So once it's folded, with the folded part at the top, lay your Breyer on it sideways like this. Make sure the end part here matches where you want the blanket to end, and then leave extra room in the front right here. Now I have the back of the horse lined up with the top of the paper there, and I'm going to mark where the neck is right here. Then you're going to mark the belly. This piece of paper is about the right length for him, so I don't really have to cut it, but I'm going to mark it anyway just to show you. So you want to put in a mark about how long you want it to be. Then you're going to mark the front of the neck right here, as well as where you want this piece to stop, because it has to be smaller than here. So I'm going to go about above the legs here and mark there. Now if you take the horse off, you can see my pencil marks, but I'm going to make them darker for you. So these are my marks. What you want to do now is draw out your pattern. So I like to start at the neck here. All you have to do is curve a line from this mark here up to this mark there. It can be messy for now, it doesn't matter too much. You're going to cut it all out and this doesn't have to be a work of art. I did forget one thing, so let me just lay him back on here. Sorry about that. You also have to mark the back of the legs right here so you know where the blanket has to stop. Now from that measurement you can take this front measurement to behind the legs and do another kind of curved line like that. And then from here it would be straight across all the way to the back, however long you need the blanket to be. So I like to just extend the lines like this and like that, probably all the way to the end of the paper there, and I'll just cut this whole thing. Then I'll cut it once I can fit it on him. Now you can cut the whole thing out. There's not that much to cut. You just have to cut along this line and this line, as well as how long you need it here if you're going to be cutting that. Now you should have something like this that opens up to look like that. And you can put that on your Breyer like this. Now obviously this is a paper pattern, so it doesn't fit that well, but this is about how big it's going to be. So this is where you make any adjustments that are needed. If you think it's too long here or too short, if you're going to cut this. So of course I need to cut mine, so what I would just do is take one side here, measure it over to the other side about there, maybe put a little fold in that, and then fold it over and cut them both at once so they are equal. So now it should do up just like that properly, and you can make any other adjustments as needed. Now that that's done, there is one more pattern that has to be made, and that is the tail piece here. And to do that, I usually like to take the cutoff from the neck piece, like this, and this rounded part usually makes the tail piece. Now, of course, this may not work if your horse's neck is rather skinny, but in this case, it fits pretty well over as the tail area. So all you have to do is cut it at an appropriate length to where it needs to sit. Once this is all done, you have both pattern pieces and you're ready to cut your fabric. When it comes to your fabric, you usually have two options. You could either do the same fabric on both sides, or one pattern on one side, then like a solid or something that matches it on the other side. Or you could do two completely different fabrics on each side. So all you have to do is lay out your fabric good side facing down, so that way you can trace on the bad side. Then trace and cut out a piece of your main body fabric. Make sure to trace the whole thing and then cut out, leaving a seam allowance, usually about 1/4 of an inch on all sides, as well as a piece of your tail fabric. Again, make sure to leave a seam allowance on all sides. Once you have both pieces cut out, you need to cut out a second piece. And to do that, I usually don't trace it. I just take the piece of fabric. This time I do good side facing up, so that way I have sandwiched them good side to good side like this. And then you can just cut out a general shape around it. So just leave it like that and you can just cut a kind of square around it. And then that gives you lots of room to work with when you sew it together. So the tail piece is very straightforward. You just have to follow the whole curved line all the way around with your stitching, leaving the bottom open so that way we can flip it. Now you can cut off all the excess, leaving a little bit so it doesn't fray, and then flip it right side out. For the main part, there is a extra step that needs to be completed before sewing the two pieces together, and that is to lay the pattern on the horse, and then use a pen or something to write with, and mark where you need the belly straps to be. Horse blankets usually have the strap that goes between the back legs. However, I don't add those to my blankets just because it's kind of an unnecessary hassle. This isn't a real horse, so of course you don't actually need them, but it also is a lot of work to try to add them. I just prefer to add the belly straps to actually keep the blanket on, and the blanket stays on perfectly fine without the extra straps between the legs. Once you have the pattern marked, you can transfer the marks to the wrong side of the fabric. Then measure and cut a piece of ribbon that can cross under the belly of the horse diagonally like this. Once those have been measured, you can pin them on top of the marks in the fabric. Now what's very important here is the direction in which you pin the ribbon. So you need to make sure that after the pattern has been traced onto the fabric, you pin the ribbon inward like this. So imagine this is my ribbon. I'm using a very thick, colorful one for an easy example. So in the end, you want the ribbon to be sticking out of the piece of the blanket like this, so that way you can use it properly and cross it underneath. But in order to do that, the whole blanket has to be flipped inside out, so that way all the seams are hidden on the inside and the outside is outward. That's why you trace the fabric on the bad side, you trace the pattern on the bad side of the fabric, but then when you pin them together, you have to pin the ribbon facing inward like this. So there should be a little bit sticking out so you know where it is, and then the rest is inside, sandwiched between the two layers of fabric. Now that the tail piece has been completely sewn and then cut the excess off, you have to flip it right side out. To do that, you probably want to cut some notches along here, the rounded part here, to relieve the tension. Once that's done, you should have something that looks like this, and now you have to go around the whole thing and top stitch it. So that's just a fancy way of saying it. Stitch over the whole thing again to keep it nice and flat. You can iron before doing this step if you want to. Now it should look something like this, and it's ready to add to the blanket. Now going back to my blanket example, which should look like this. We have to sew the tail flap in the exact same way as the ribbon. So you need it sticking out like this once the blanket is complete. So in order to do that, you have to sew it inside out like this. You're going to need to sew these sides as well as this, but leave a gap here. So what I like to do is sew along here, here, and inward a little bit, and then all along this side as well, leaving the neck part open. By doing that, you will be able to flip it all inside out, and then you can fold over the neck part and then top stitch it all into place, just like this. Once you are done, it should look like this. This one is completed, of course, but you should have all the ribbons and the tail flap coming out. And then all you have to do is top stitch around the whole thing. Just do a straight stitch all along the whole thing, making sure it's flipped properly, as well as around the neck opening where you left it open. So what you want to do for this is just to slowly fold it in and then stitch, and fold it in and then stitch, or fold it all in and then pin it in place, then stitch. Of course, you can do it that way too. After all of that is completed, you've done most of the blanket. It's just the simple matter of attaching the closures. So I put Velcro on the front here. Most of the time, real blankets will have a Velcro and then some buckles to keep it together. Again, similar to the strap between the legs, I don't bother adding the buckles because they're not necessary for this. If you want to make your blanket more realistic, you can definitely add them, but I am content with just the Velcro. So to do that, you just have to make sure you sew one piece to one side and then the other piece of the Velcro to the other side of the fabric, so that way they can overlap like this. Then for the ribbons, I like to cut all of them about the same length, just so that way I have more than enough to work with. Then to measure, you just have to put the blanket on your horse, and then flip him upside down and cross these straps. I just realized this blanket is way too small for you. Just a minute. As I was saying, to measure the belly straps, cross the straps underneath the Breyer's belly and bring them up on the other side. Then you can just measure where they meet up on the other side with the other ribbon and cut those to the appropriate length. Then you can add whatever closure you like. I like to use hook and eyes for this, but you could also use lobster clasps or make your own little buckles. Once it's done, it should look something like this, with a closure in the front made of Velcro and the flap for the tail right here. You can iron it if you'd like to make it lay a little flatter. Mine is creased right here because it's been folded for a while. And as I said at the beginning of this video, you can use the exact same method to make fly sheets if you'd like. So that is how I make Breyer blankets, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Bye.